Good evening and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Welcome to all of you viewers, wherever you are, whether you are in Guyana. Guyana is still beautiful despite the ugliness of its politics sometimes. It's still our country, our beautiful country. Um, so if you're in Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. If you are in the diaspora, whether in our larger Caribbean area, welcome. Lots of us in Antigua. If you're in Antigua, welcome. Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, or wherever you are in the wider Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101. And of course, if you're in North America, in Buxton, we usually say that Brooklyn Dale is the village next door to Buxton. And because, whenever things happen in the village, people in Brooklyn, New York, tend to learn of what's happening in the village long before people in the village do. And so we refer to Brooklyn as Annandale, as a twin village, Buxton Friendship, Annandale. So if you're in Brooklyn, New York, or if you're in Washington, D.C., Maryland, that's where I lived for 12 years, and that's where a lot of my siblings and relatives are. Welcome. Welcome if you're in Washington, D.C., you're joining us from there. Welcome. And if you're in any part of North America, in the United States, of course, or whether you are in Canada, welcome to Politics 101. Of course, if you're in Europe, the United Kingdom, France, or any part of the European continent, welcome. And if you're joining us from other regions of the world, welcome, 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 welcome to Politics 101. Here we try to do our part in educating, in organizing and mobilizing our people. I just like to take the opportunity to express condolences to the Youngs in my village. Quite a family in Buxton, the famous George Young, who's the man of Proverbs, comes from that family. Dosley Young and all the Youngs there. I like to express my condolences to them, the passing of their brother Walter. Condolences to the Youngs and to the people of Buxton. We seem to be mourning the loss of so many people over the last year or two. It sometimes becomes so hard to deal with. But my own teacher, I just learned a few days ago from Buxton, my second standard teacher, Emmy Young. My first two teachers were Paulette Wilson and Emmy Young. Little ABC and Big ABC, as they said, and I remember those two women very well because, in those days, they hold your hand to teach you to write. They taught me to read. And I never forgot that and indebted to them. One of them, Emmy, she passed away recently there in Buxton. I was in Buxton and heard that she was ailing and wanted to go see her, but it was not convenient to do so. She passed away, one of my first teachers, and as a teacher myself, I put a lot of store on my teachers, and we all should do because teachers ultimately, like our parents, help to mold us, and we don't know often the values and the value of our teachers until we get later in life and we realize that by then we are the formed material, and then you look and you realize that these are the people who made you who you are. I remember teacher me very well, as I said, teaching me to read and write and never forget that. And to our relatives, our sister with me, my condolences, and it really hurts because I'm at that age where I now have the I now have the opportunity to look back and to think about how far I have come and who have made me, and often I go back to my teachers. Sometimes the way I talk, my phrasing, all of that comes from the influence of teachers. Good night to all the Bostonians in the house. I see Lynette Zephyr, who lived not far from Teacher Emmy, and so she would know Teacher Emmy very well. Good night to you, Lynette, and good night to all the Bostonians in the audience tonight. Our show tonight is it's going to be what I call a broader, a more incisive conversation on the crisis that is facing us, the gathering storm, as I like to put it, and the question of the coronavirus and the kind of collisions that it has spawned in Guyana and the rest of the world. When you have a pandemic, a health pandemic, and then you already had a social pandemic in your country before a political pandemic. Then you add the health pandemic to the political pandemic, the economic pandemic. It's really bizarre. It gets bizarre. Whole house pan whole house, as they say. So tonight I'm going to have Dr. Van West Charles, who's both a politician and a medical doctor, to help us to answer some of the questions and to tease out some of the challenges that we're facing as a result of COVID-19. It's now been a full year and a half, going on to 2 years of the pandemic, and we're still grappling. We're still grappling with the consequences of it. It brings to the fore the question of personal liberty, the question of science, whether we can trust science, whether science is right. It brings to the fore the question of the law, Today, we heard that the Trade Union Congress and two of its affiliates, the Guyana Teachers Union and the Guyana Public Service Union, they've gone to court to ask the court to find that the orders given by President Ali are unlawful. The mandates and the orders to lock out and to all those orders were given. They've gone to court. Those three trade unions, well, two trade unions and the umbrella organization, the Trade Union Congress, they've gone to court to ask the court to find that the government's actions are unlawful. This morning, I raised the question of the lawfulness, whether the actions taken by the government are consistent with the state of emergency and not be a state of emergency. And I've been informed by us that we are not yet in a state of emergency. And it seems to me that the government is acting as though we're in a state of emergency. And so they've gone to court to ask the court to find that the president's actions are unlawful. So there we have a legal development. Now the law is coming in. The Constitution, of course, has not been silent, and the question of contagious diseases, the Constitution the Constitution is quite explicit whether, in fact, the government is overstepping its constitutional mandate is what the court has to answer. So there we go. Again, Article 139(1) of the Guyana Constitution says, no person shall be deprived of his or her personal liberty, save as may be authorized by law, any of the following cases. And then it goes to 139(1)(g) that says, for the purpose of preventing the spread of an infectious or contagious disease. So the Constitution said no person shall be deprived of his or her personal liberty, save as may be authorized by law in any of the following areas. And it lists several areas, and one of the areas listed is G, that says for the purpose of preventing the spread of an infectious or contagious disease. The government may be relying on 139(1)(g), which gives it the power to deprive a person of their personal liberty for the purposes of preventing the spread of an infectious or contagious disease. Whether the president has read this part of the Constitution too narrowly or too broadly is what the court will have to answer. What the court will have to answer. So it's there in the Constitution that says the government can deprive you of your permanent, your personal liberty to prevent the spread of a contagious disease. Now that's the law, and the law is usually very broad. The law needs interpretation. Now, what the court will have to say is whether those orders given by the president are consistent with 139(1)(g. Whether the president is acting consistent with 139(1)(g. So here we go to the courts again. And it is for that reason that I was cautioning last night and this morning to my viewers that we are facing a very complex situation, you know, and that we have to be very careful as we go through it, you know. The lawyers for the unions are saying that the president, they're saying that the president does not have those broad powers, and that those powers are really for a regulatory body called the Central Board of Health, and that it's the Central Board of Health that has to be convened and has to give those mandates. The applicants say that nothing has stopped the Central Board of Health from convening to make regulation, adding that the regulatory powers of the president should only be exercised for such time that it is reasonably necessary until a meeting of the Central Board of Health can be convened. You see, this is a story with law, right? The Constitution says that The Constitution says that the government has the right to deprive our personal liberty to stop the spread of a contagious disease. But then you go down and you read other law, which says that the president can only act temporarily. The president can only act temporarily, that ultimately the power to determine those those regulations rests with a constitutional body. It rests with a constitutional body. It rests with this regulatory body. You see? So we are into new territory now. We are into new territory. The president can only act temporarily. This is what the lawyers for the unions are saying. And that ultimately it is this regulatory body, which has to give the mandate or not give the mandate. So the court, and we in Guyana know that our cases go all the way to the CCJ. The Central Board of Health has to convene, right? And it has not been convened. And the president can only act temporarily until that body is convened. And it is that body that will have to give the regulations. So here we are, law. And that is the reason I'm saying that the situation is not a dry situation. Often we ordinary citizens don't read the Constitution, but the Constitution is very clear that the government can deprive. The lawyers are arguing that the president can only act temporarily, and that is this board that has to meet and has to give the regulations or not give the regulations. So we go to court, and our side of the political argue the court has not been kind to us. So here we go again. And that is why I'm cautioning and saying, this thing got legs. Over in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, the government has mandated that in order for school children to go into the schools physically, they have to be vaccinated. But those children who are not vaccinated will have to be taught by distance. They'll have to be taught via Zoom and these other distance. So in Trinidad and Tobago, the government has given a mandate. The government has said that in order for schools to open, students must be vaccinated. But then it goes on to say, and these are my words here, that those who choose not to be vaccinated cannot be treated as non-citizens. The government has to make allowances for them. What the government of Trinidad and Tobago has done is said, we are not going to allow unvaccinated students to go physically in school, but we are going to make arrangements for them to be taught by this. That is the compromise that I'm talking about. I was talking about this morning, and I got lots of stick from the viewers who I think in the heat of the moment didn't get enough time to digest what I was trying to say when I was saying that there is a third way, right? In Trinidad, they have that third way. You're not going to go to school physically if you're not vaccinated, but the government has a responsibility to make sure that you're taught. Now, some parent can go to court and say, what that means is that you're getting two types of education. You're getting face-to-face education and online education. They can argue that the online education discriminates because it assumes that you have internet, it assumes that you have computer, it assumes all those things. And it assumes that internet education and face-to-face education are the same. Those of us who teach will tell you it's not the same. It's not the same. There's a lot of resistance to online teaching in the teaching fraternity. I see Glenn is in. She's a teacher, and she would know what I'm talking about. A lot of us teachers, we push back against online teaching because we feel that we are shortchanging the children, right? And so someone in Trinidad and Tobago can go to court and argue that those two kinds of teachings violate people's right to equal justice. You know, in the segregation period in America, some states, when the court forced them to admit Black students to white schools, because the court said that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution requires that all students must have the same education. And so a lot of the white universities had to start admitting Black students. But what they would do is that they would have two types of instructions. The Black students weren't allowed to go on campus. They would go to the city hall, and the professors would go there and teach them separately from the whites who were in campus. That happened in America during segregation. So somebody in Trinidad challenged that. But the point I'm making is that in Trinidad and Tobago, they're looking for a compromise, right? Instead of forcing everybody to be vaccinated, they give the mandate. Those who go and get vaccinated, they say, you can come to school physically. And those who are not vaccinated, they don't throw them to the dogs. What they do is they say, okay, so we still have an obligation to you. We're going to teach you by a distance. In Guyana, the Ministry of Education is saying everybody must go to school. And that's what I was saying this morning. And I'm saying, no, that's not a compromise. That's not a compromise. And when you're faced with a crisis, you have to have compromises. And that is why I was cautioning our supporters this morning, and I'm cautioning them now, that we also have to search for compromise. If we ask in the government to compromise, we the citizens must also compromise, because that's how we're going to beat this thing. That's how we're going to keep everybody together. That's how we're going to keep the society together. We've got to compromise, right? The problem is that Guyana, because of our politics, is so difficult to compromise. You know, people are saying, well, Dr. Hines, you're asking us to compromise, but the government is not going to compromise. And you know, they have a point. You know, but one has to always be optimistic, and one has to say that we've got to search. All of us are citizens. Whether we take the vaccine or don't take the vaccines, we are citizens, and we are entitled to equal justice before the law. Whether we believe in vaccine or we don't believe in vaccine, we are entitled to equal justice before the law. And the government has to find a way not to demonize anti-vaccine people, but to find a way to compromise. And I say the Trinidad model, it's not perfect, but it's a compromise. And that's what I am calling for, you know? That conversation may not be the solution to this grave problem that is facing our country and that is facing the world. I'm expecting Dr. Richard Van West Charles to come on tonight. I think he has a, let me see, I think there's a message here for me. He's backstage, bring him on. I am waiting. I'm just filling in. Hey, Richard, I didn't realize that you were me. Good village manners. Why? Because you come from Kitty, people realize it, you know. Kitty was a village, you know.
That's right.
They say never keep your guests waiting. I'm so sorry. I was just holding until you come on, Richard. I don't know how much you hear of what I was saying. And the reason I invite you is this. I think we have here a clash of public health and politics. And you, God bless you, you are both a public person, a political person, a medical doctor, and a medical doctor. Practical experience because you served as Minister of Health. I assume at some point you had to do practical work in hospitals, but you also serve at PAO, you serve internationally. So I think you are well placed to help us because I think we need help on this thing. First of all, do you agree with me that what we are in the face of is a challenge that should not be read narrowly? That it is something that challenges our society in ways that go beyond the vaccine, beyond whether we take the vaccine or not. That it's a critical period in our history that we have to work our way through. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, and thanks for having me, and good evening to your listeners. Let me start off by saying is that it is important that we understand the transmission of the virus, and that the emphasis on vaccination by itself is not the answer. That vaccination plus the adherence to the public health guidelines are both critical in order for us to reduce the risk of transmission. So this emphasis that is being placed singularly on vaccines is done because there isn't a proper understanding of the transmission. Now, let me deal with education first, because this is very important. One of the most important things for schools is that we must be reassured that the school environment is safe. Now, that safety by itself is not given by vaccination. It has to have a layered approach in which there is adherence to the guidelines, and water and sanitation becomes a critical component of that. The ventilation within the schools become very, very important. How the students are coming to school, the transportation is very, very important. Because just today, I get daily updates on COVID. And you do have, in both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, high levels of the virus within the nasal passages. The issue is that the vaccinated are more protected, and they are not going to, the probability of them getting seriously ill and hospitalized is significantly reduced because of the vaccination. But that does not mean that if we are looking at a country or an environment in terms of seeking to reduce the transmission in the country, that those who are vaccinated are going to do away with the adherence to the public health guidelines. It cannot happen. It will not bear the results that we want. So it is important. And when you are considering the protocols in the schools, you've got to look at the social distancing in each classroom and be sure that you have the protocols that will permit the children, first of all, to understand how they have got to wear their masks. And if perchance one child in a class comes down infected, you really have to move that entire class to home. And significantly, importantly, is the work recently out of CDC with Mathematica and the Rockefeller Foundation shows that testing of the school population of teachers, workers, and students on a weekly basis can reduce the transmission by 50%. So testing is a sine qua non if we understand the issue of transmission, that it has to be done. So this rush to open and you must be vaccinated by itself doesn't help. Now, you were mentioning about the hybrid approach in Trinidad. The hybrid approach still has to be embraced, because if two or three kids in a class are infected, then you've got to look at that class. They've got to go home. They've got to be quarantined, because you've got to remove them from the school environment, but they still have to continue learning. So the virtual side of what we are doing has to also be in line with what the lessons and so forth that are going on and the varying levels of classes within the school environment. Now, you also have, from the political side, you cannot erode the rights of people based on this matter. These are human rights; they've got to be protected. And because this virus is, we don't know everything about this virus. Many people have concerns. It is important that we seek to understand what those concerns are, because people are getting information on the internet from all over the place. But I think, let me say very clearly, that had the government been transparent and inclusive, we would not have had the issue of distrust. And the distrust is increasing on a daily basis because of how the government is acting on this matter. And so you're having the distrust, you're having increasing vaccine tendency, although you're trying to, I was on Mark Benchop, you're trying to, which I feel so ashamed, giving people 2 pieces of chicken to have the kids vaccinated.
Yeah.
That is sad for us as a society, that we need to. But the other thing is, what have they considered if a few kids come down with COVID, and heaven forbid 1 or 2 of them may pass? How are we going to deal with the psychological impact with all of those students in the classroom?
Yeah. Yeah.
How are we going to deal with the parents, and what will it happen? But more so, David, look, all of these vaccines will require boosters. Everyone.
Yeah.
So if you are having this difficulty and people are not understanding, internalizing the issues of transmission, etc., when it comes to the round of boosters, what are you going to do? Come with a gun?
Yeah.
So, and let me say to you that this pandemic is not restricted to the public sector. It's restricted to the private sector and people who are self-employed, etc. You know, so this move on the public sector and not evenly done is going to create more problems for us. And you know what, it may not be intentional, but it appears as if it has an ethnic bias to what they're doing. So let us try to be, I have been calling for more inclusion. And at a political level, they need to have inclusion to build the trust, because people do not accept and trust the government based on their actions. And I said to you, look, the distrust seems to be converging not only with COVID, with the flood, with the other grants, etc. So there's a convergence of distrust by sectors of the society because of how the government is acting.
Yeah.
But this is a national security issue, and they have got to try to back off and listen and understand, look at what the larger countries are also doing, right? In terms of the discussion of mandatory vaccines, it's the wrong route to go. And if they can change their approach, I think we're a small country. We can move very quickly to do what we have to do. But because they are so hard-headed and they feel that they must direct, the dictatorial attitude is what is causing the problem.
Yes, and you're so right, Dr. Van West Charles. What I'm trying to do here this evening is to begin what I call a safe place where we can have this kind of discourse, this kind of reasoning, because I think it is so important. I think when the government abandons the nation has to take care of itself. And it is why I invite you to come on here. I don't talk about my own personal experience. I'm teaching a class of 150 students. There's no social distancing. All we're required to do is to wear masks, right? And I'm in that class. I am in that building. And I think the human side of it sometimes gets lost in the politics, And I go into that class twice a week, that classroom twice a week. And I'm praying to my God, even though I am not, a bleeding heart Christian, And so it is that kind of conversation I want us to have, the daily risks. And as you said, we are in a country like Guyana where we have a dictatorial government, a stubborn government, a government that appears to thrive on ignorance, not knowing, and even when they know, they don't know how to manage what they know. And that exacerbates the problem. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Dr. Richard Van West Charles on the COVID-19. It's old story, but it's new story. It's yesterday, it's today, and it's going to be tomorrow. Let's take a short break.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
I'm David Hines, political activist and commentator. If you're looking for informed discussion on Guyanese politics, you must join me every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6:30 on Politics 101 with Dr. David Hines. On that program, I interview policymakers, politicians, political activists on Guyanese politics in the past and the present. So make sure you tune in to Politics 101 on CAMS TV at 6:30 every Tuesday and Thursday. And on Mondays at 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 p.m., you can join me for Hindsight. On that program, I give my take on politics. And then you can call in and talk to me about the politics in Guyana, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. That's Monday evenings at 7 o'clock. And so here we go. Monday, 7 o'clock, you can join me. On Tuesday at 6:30, Politics 101. On Thursdays at 6:30, Politics 101. And if you haven't That's enough of me by then. You can catch me on Tuesday mornings on the Buxtonian Morning Time with Kedati Amsterdam, where we rap about politics also. And that's at 7 o'clock in the morning on Hams TV. All of these programs are on Hams TV. So catch me Monday, on Tuesday, on Thursday, and you get all you want to know about Guyanese politics. And welcome back to Politics 101. I want to thank Calvin and an anonymous donor for your donation to us this week to help to keep the program online and on air on Channel 9 for your donations. And my extensive welcome, I forgot Suriname and French Guyana. We usually refer to Suriname and French Guyana as part of the larger Caribbean. Indeed, Suriname is part of CARICOM, but they're part of what we call the wider Caribbean. But we say that and we forget them. Denise, I think it's Denise, who says that she's joining us from French Guyana. We in Guyana call it Cayenne. You grow up, you say, by the Mangana Cayenne. Right? Later on, you will know that it was French Guyana. And of course, Suriname, our immediate neighbor. Welcome if you're joining us from those two countries. As we continue our discussion here tonight, before I bring back Dr. Van West Charles for us to continue our discussion, something caught my eye today in the newspapers. The Stabroek News front page story, which says that Exxon, they have presented their half-yearly report, the first 6 months of the year, and they said they've spent $19.1 billion in Guyana in the first 6 months of the year. That story caught my attention. $19 billion in the first half of 2021. They said that the Guyanese section of their workforce has grown, and it now represents 53% of Exxon's total workforce, which is up from 38%. Grew by 38%. They also said that they have engaged 750 Guyanese vendors of goods and services ranging from food to engineering. So $19 billion in 6 months, 700 and odd vendors, 53% of their workforce Guyanese. Now, one call on last night's program saying that, look, money is coming from oil, but they are not seeing it, right? What we want to know from ExxonMobil is this. where that $19.1 billion, where that $19 billion going? Who are the 700 and odd vendors? Which section of the society they come from? Who are those workers? 2,000, they said 2,000 and odd workers, Guyanese workers who were now part of 2,070 workers, and which includes 568 women. Who are they? We need an ethnic impact statement as to who are benefiting from these monies that are coming from ExxonMobil. And I want to appeal to our parliamentarians, because this information was lodged with the government, and I want to appeal to our parliamentarians to seek to get that information, because we are in an ethnically divided society, and we want to know where these monies are going. You know, who are these workers? Because we are talking about equity and equality in the distribution of the resources. So I just want to put that on the table. I know we are busy sometimes, we're inundated with news every day, and of course we are concerned with the big issue of the day, which is the COVID-19 and everything that comes with that. But this is an important piece of story. And like I said, I have already begun to talk to a couple of parliamentarians and to ask them if they can go to work in getting that information for the public. We want to know, we ought to know that information, because it's important as we continue to try to make sense of our Guyana. Richard Van West Charles, Dr. Van West Charles is here with us. Dr. Charles, Dr. Van West, so how do we, you talked a lot about education. How do we, at this juncture, where the trust levels are very low, certainly in one section of the population, how do we cut through that to get the necessary kind of education into the communities?
Well, I think, to me, it starts off really from the point of the National Task Force. And the government, if the government continues to be resistant, it now will be resting on the hands of the population for demands in certain things to happen. The point you're making about ethnicity is also very relevant to this issue of COVID. That I think they may be collecting some data based on ethnicity, but obviously there are other determinants related to ethnicity that are that will be relevant to the whole analysis of this transmission of the virus in certain conditions, in certain environments. And I would hope that, at one point in time, I heard that, okay, the Afro-Guyanese population is way below. But you can't just declare that and then say, well, because of that, they need to be forced to be vaccinated. If we are having transparency in this whole process, I would want to be having access to the data with respect to testing, for example, and also looking at the other ethnic groupings in the society to see what is happening, and looking at some regional data with respect to the issue and how the centers are distributed, etc. But it's very difficult. This is a closed box by the Ministry of Health, and it's very difficult for you to penetrate, to have access to information or data to afford any evidence-based comment in many ways. So it is something that really requires all of us. But in the meantime, I think if we understand the elements of transmission, then within the school system, and parents have a right to be able to demand and see which protocols are being operationalized in the schools where their children are attending. and look at the classrooms. If the classrooms are overcrowded, I think demands need to be made for the social distancing and arrangements made to separate the kids, and look at the water and sanitation in the schools every time, and how the recess of students is being organized. You can't have all the students at the same time going out for recess, and how are they going to be having meals? This is another thing, the nutritional component related to COVID in schools, they need to be seriously looking at. So when you look at the investment, and I said earlier about the transportation, so if it is one area, I would say to you that the impact from oil we should see is looking at the schools in their preparation to deal with this pandemic. And you, as I said, the teachers that have problems, that have concerns, we have to work with those teachers to understand where the concerns are, what information they have. In many cases, it may be misinformation. I have offered more than once to work and support the Ministry of Health in whatever they have to do. I am even saying that from a political standpoint, our party, my party, should be at the forefront dealing with this issue also, because it's a very critical issue. And I'm a proponent of vaccination, but with WHO approved, as I've said before, WHO approved vaccines. But it is not either or. There are a number of other things that have got to be in place, even in offices. You can't say I'm comfortable because the workers are vaccinated, and that's it. And then you are look at what happened to the magistrate. I mean, I haven't got the details, but those things shouldn't happen. I mean, things, the entry into the institution, the people who are ill, you can't have people who are not trained to manage that place. You've got to put some of your more experienced people at the front line.
Yes.
More experienced people at the front line than to be putting your people who don't even understand the transmission, and who are just a gatekeeper trying to look at these things. So I think the fact that they're not stepping back and they're not listening is moving us as a country into a very difficult place and a very bad place. And that's why we're trying to go the legal route. At the end of the day, we've got to come back to this issue of health and how we intervene to make this thing done properly for the protection of the nation.
Yeah. And I'm glad you raised the question of Magistrate Sullivan, because I'm saying even in a crisis, you should not have somebody sending a family member to go look for a wheelchair and to go look. That's the point. That should never happen. It should never happen, because what it shows is that our humanity seems to be going.
Bad management.
Yes. Yeah. Let me. You raise an important point at the beginning, and that's ethnicity, and what's happening in Guyana with the COVID, the management of COVID. The Minister of Health gave some very revealing information, I think it was yesterday, in which he talked about some hotspots. He mentioned Tushen on East Bank of Essequibo, or what we call West Coast. And then he went to the East Coast, and he talked about hotspots in Better Hope and more in Mahaika, and on the East Bank in Grove and Timeri and Diamond. So it seems that this thing is an equal. It's an equal offender. What do you make of that kind of data? I mean, I'm not saying that it tells us specifically about the ethnic impact, but what do you make when you hear the names of those communities?
Look, the distribution, you can expect that is happening, and I would suspect there are many other communities that they may want to, I don't know what they're classifying as a hotspot, and the definitions are always important. Huh?
Yeah.
But
I think they're looking at where there are relatively large numbers. In those places they mentioned, they're talking about 30-something, 40-something cases. Because they said they have over 1,000 active cases.
Well, I would want to ask also, where is the information on variants in Guyana related to the hotspots? And we've been asking for this more than for the past few months. And all you can hear is that, yes, they believe variants are circulating. Now, come on. He's a physician. You're the Ministry of Health. You must be able, in every other country, they can tell you which variants are circulating. Why do you want to cover that down and hide that information? We should know. People should know, because they are going on the internet and they're seeing and understanding the Delta variant. They know and they're reading. So the issue with them, I don't know, for example, what is the distribution per region in terms of number of tests done on a daily basis, for example. I mean, when I see that you have 81 cases today, from how many tests across the country?
Yeah.
Where are these testing centers? What is the production of the testing centers? Do we have enough? So there are many questions about our capability in the management of this program, which I think I would hope the parliamentarians will press the government on. And some of the issues, it is sad that the Ethnic Relations Commission is not engaging with some of these issues. It seems as if they have boundaries in terms of what they do. But these things are very, very important in terms of understanding the distribution, the quality of distribution of resources and how we deal with it. If you look at in terms of the schools, you're going to have more people cleaning those classrooms with a greater frequency during the day when kids are in and out of the classrooms, if we really want to reduce the transmission. So and I believe that we need to be reassured that the head teachers, head mistresses, they understand the transmission of the disease, because you've got to start at that point, and the senior masters in a school. So I was suggesting that, especially for schools, that you have PAHO WHO, you have UNICEF, you have the bank, right? The EU, plus the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education establish, and some other people, establish a monitoring committee to ensure that these schools are up to scratch in terms of responding to the criteria for COVID. Give people some confidence. You see, people's trust is equal to the effectiveness of the vaccines. And so if they have no trust, you're going to lose in terms of the effectiveness and the hesitancy components in what we have to do.
Trust is important, Dr. Richard Van West Charles. Let me say good night to Rachel McBean. Rachel is listening from Europe. He is up very late because it's late in Europe, making the sacrifice to stay with us and to be part of the conversation. Good night. Rachel Vibert from Grove. Good night to you. And good night, of course, to all of you viewers who have joined us tonight as we try to create a safe spot, a very quiet spot where we can talk about this problem, talk through the problem, because we are at risk of getting to the point where we are beginning to talk past each other, and God forbid that this COVID crisis divides us at a time when we need to be united. We don't want that. All of us are God's children. All of us are Guyanese citizens. All of us are deserving of consideration, whether we are hesitant about the vaccine, whether we are resistant to the vaccine, whether we took the vaccine. We are all involved in this thing, and it's not them versus us. We have identified that management, public management, is very important to public health. It has been stressed here tonight by Dr. Richard Van West Charles. Public management is important to public health. We have also established that too much of politics is not good for this kind of situation. It's a delicate situation, very delicate situation. And so therefore, we want to take a deep breath, sit back, and let's talk about this. Richard, to open or not to open schools, what's your take? To open or not to open, you've mentioned all the challenges. If you were advising Minister of Education to open or not to open, or to use the hybrid model as Trinidad is using?
Well, I think we have to agree that the criteria are well set, and that the schools must, the physical environment must meet the criteria, first of all, before you agree to open. Once that is there, then you look at the adherence to the guidelines and how are you going to monitor that adherence. So the wearing of masks is critical and vital. The supply of the masks, the cleaning of the classrooms. And it's not a one-off cleaning, not cleaning it on Sunday and it's not cleaned on Monday morning, it's not cleaned at midday, it's not cleaned in the evening. It has to be cleaned with a certain frequency every day. So you need people with the right materials and to be shown how to clean. Because we in Guyana, we assume that everyone knows how to clean, especially under these conditions. So people have got to be trained to do what is right in relation to the transmission that we're talking about. So it has, that's why I say that it's not managed properly. And I don't get this sense that even the Ministry of Education understands the elements, because I mean the sad comment from the Minister of Education about parents must assume that parents are illiterates. It's a very baffling and foolish statement, and therefore it tells you that they're not in a position where they understand what is going on. Every parent, you need to be able to have, and you would, I know it's difficult for parent teachers associations, but you have to move to ensure and get the churches involved, because a lot of these parents go to the churches. So you've got to reach out and ensure that you're gaining in terms of the understanding of what has to be done. Now, look at the impact. Once things are done properly at the school level, the children learn and they take it home. So you're going to have an additive effect in terms of what happens in the home, because the child now understands, look, my classroom is safe because A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I go home and I say, my home needs to be safe because we need to be cleaning more frequently, washing our hands more frequently, and doing things differently. So even though you're vaccinated, right? And you may have one person at the home who really cannot be vaccinated, but even though the others are vaccinated, what are the things we have to do within that home?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they need to step back and look at this thing in a rather comprehensive manner. And also, I worry that the private sector commission is not deeply involved, because all of these stores are crowded. I don't see, you know, if you look at when you're going to any establishment, there is somebody with at the entrance in some places with the sanitizer. So they put it in one hand, and now you walk off, and nobody looks to see whether both hands are washed.
Yeah.
I observed somebody, they turn the tap on at the sink, they put their hands under the water, no soap, and then they go in. And they say, well, I wash my hands. So all of these things are happening because we're not paying a great emphasis on the educational side of things and how it should be done. We have to spend time to educate. So, and it's a paradox that you see, that we're talking about the school system and looking at now the people's education.
Yeah.
How it should be done, why it should be done. So I can just, from a national standpoint, really say to the government, and I've been asking them to look, let's be inclusive. And the point you made about the politicians cannot be the sole messengers in this issue. Allow the public health professionals to come forward and do what they have to do to educate the population. Let us do it right. We are a small country. We have a lot in store for us ahead, and therefore let us try to see. But also for us, David, look, we have the issue of transportation, a major issue. When you see the minibuses, they're packed.
Yeah.
Now, you're talking about protecting our school children, and we're seeing, I looked at a curve this morning out of CDC, and it's the younger age group are going to be having the serious illnesses after vaccination.
Yeah.
And therefore, the control that we should be doing is very, very critical with the youth. And remember, we haven't got a vaccine for the under 12s. So the under 12s are going to be important. How we practice the guidelines within those schools where you have the under 12 kids. So I think we need to look at this thing in a rather serious manner. They are going to the court, but they seem stubborn. And I think the lawyers may be right with respect to the Central Board of Health. The Central Board of Health is the one who should be looking and analyzing this data and deciding whether or not what action should be taken.
I'm glad you went there, because that's what I was coming to. The Central Board of Health in Guyana, how active has it been in the past? For somebody like myself who is engaged in this thing, it is not a name that sticks in my mind. I have not heard it enough. I now know it's there since the COVID-19. But tell us a little bit more about that body and how it operates.
Well, it meets. It has a chairman and members from different agencies. I know GWI had a representative on it, etc. And however, it varies. Its role and its intervention differs from administration to administration. And maybe it's something that we should be looking at it a bit more, because my own view, I had a thought of the Central Board of Health even being more involved in the national planning of health systems, etc., because they should be having the data and should be supported by a secretariat that can do more analysis. But clearly, they should have all the data with respect to the notification of the diseases, such as COVID and all other infectious diseases that are occurring. So it is an important body, but like everything else, our politics tend to invade a lot of these institutions. and as we are going forward. And it can happen under all administrations. And as we go forward, we need to change these bodies, ensure that they function effectively in accordance with the Constitution. Because you are right, it is this body that can issue the regulations, that should issue all of the regulations with respect to what is happening. So I would hope, I don't think the president probably, I don't know if he consulted with the body. That wasn't reported, but it would have been at least an indication to us that the body had a role, the institution had a role in terms of the decision-making process, which it should have.
Mm-hmm. So you would say reopen schools under certain conditions. You're big on water and sanitation. You kept going back to that. And the reason I like that is because it is not the obvious thing, although it should be obvious. When you're talking about schools, I go into my classroom last week. I went into my classroom and I saw them with a huge area with cleaning thing and so on. It's there. And the students have to, as they go in, and faculty wash their hands thoroughly, and everything is there. And one day the students were coming in and they almost toppled the thing. I'm saying to myself, but this is so important. But we have not probably gotten used to how central that is to what you're doing.
Right, and I'm saying so because I know that just before leaving GWI, PAHO, UNICEF, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, did a survey of water and sanitation across the country. And we were in serious problems. And I do know, I think they got some money, but they could not have completed the work for all of the schools. And therefore, access to water becomes critical. And generally, I would say to you that because of COVID, the government should not be cutting back the running hours of water's access to the population.
Mm-hmm.
Even we even just before I left, looked at squatter communities. There are about 200 squatter communities. And because of COVID, these are people who are going to work in private sector, in the public sector. They need to have access to water. It's just like typhoid, that when where the people live, you got to look at access to water and sanitation very, very critically. And I have seen in Region 9, for example, a lot of white elephants for toilet facilities not functional. And that's the issue. That's why I'm going back to it all the time, that it is very, very critical, the sanitation aspect of the strategy that we are moving. So they need to say to us, is there going to be a water supply constantly during the classroom session? How many people are going to be available to be cleaning the classrooms with what frequency throughout the day? Don't assume that parents are not going to be interested in these matters, because their children, they are reading, they are hearing, and their children are in the environment. And if there isn't a safe environment, the children are going to be getting infected and taking them home also.
Yeah.
And if they're traveling on a bus, more people are going to be infected. So let us try to do things in the correct manner, right? And I said to you, look at the population of the under 12s. Try to ensure that those schools, there is no vaccination for the under 12s as yet. So let us move forward to ensure that things are done, and the adherence to the guidelines, and the ventilation is very, very critical, and the testing. They have not indicated about the testing. I'm telling you that the new data out in North America and in Europe, testing is going to be critical in terms of the reduction and giving the assurance to the population that the school is safe for to conduct its business. So those are things that we have to look at.
So, Richard, what I'm hearing from you is really a holistic approach, and that the danger is emphasizing vaccine as the beginning and the end. So a holistic approach, and our audience is paying keen attention here, because my argument is that if the government is messing up, we should not mess up. If the government is not right, and I'm very firm on that, to my brothers and sisters who are urging confrontation, and I'm saying that, we have to, there's people you have to make them listen. So I'm not opposed to protests and all of that, but I'm also arguing the human element, that we have to save ourselves if the government doesn't save us.
And I said so in a post today in a group, because they were lamenting that when the government came to distribute the grants, there was no concern for the social distancing. So people were all together, etc. Some people with masks, some people without masks. And my position and my response to them is, look, you have to take charge of your environment. You've got to learn to protect yourselves. Don't allow the government to treat you in any way. If these conditions are not met, you tell them it must be met, because it's for your own protection. And we have to take forward. So, and I am saying to some of the opposition parliamentarians and councillors that, and all councillors, that you have a right to protect the people. And therefore, the understanding by the parliamentarians and councillors in terms of the transmission is very, very important.
Yeah.
And the headmistresses and so forth need to understand it carefully. And I don't know how many sessions the Ministry of Education and Health would have run for teachers on this matter. But you can't assume that people know, because if they'd run sessions, then you would have heard the concerns and you would know what is what and how do we work with people at the same time, not eroding their rights, etc.
Dr. Richard Van West Charles, we're coming down to program time. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Dr. Van West Charles to speak a little bit about the role of international organizations like the World Health Organization, or the Pan American Health Organization, and other regional institutions. Guyana is not an island. Guyana is part of a region. It's part of a larger world, and this pandemic is a global pandemic. Take a short break, and when we come back, our closing segment with Dr. Van West Charles. Well, it seems as though, there we go.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
I'm David Hines, political activist and commentator. If you're looking for informed discussion on Guyanese politics, you must join me every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6:30 on Politics 101 with Dr. David Hines. On that program, I interview policymakers, politicians, political activists on Guyanese politics in the past and the present. So make sure you tune in to Politics 101 on CAMS TV at 6:30 every Tuesday and Thursday. And on Mondays at 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 p.m., you can join me for Hindsight. On that program, I give my take on politics. And then you can call in and talk to me about the politics in Guyana, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. That's Monday evenings at 7 o'clock. And so here we go. Monday, 7 o'clock, you can join me. On Tuesday at 6:30, Politics 101. On Thursdays at 6:30, Politics 101. And if you haven't gotten enough of me by then, you can catch me on Tuesday mornings on the Buxtonian Morning Time with Kedati Amsterdam, where we rap about politics also. And that's at 7 o'clock in the morning on CAMS TV. All of these programs are on CAMS TV. So catch me Monday, on Tuesday, on Thursday, and you get all you want to know about Guyanese politics. Thank you very much and welcome back to Politics 101. Special shout out to Onika from Annandale next door to Buxton. I mentioned Annandale at the beginning of the program. Welcome to Politics 101, Onika and all the people from Annandale. As we say in Buxton, Annandale. In the old days, we refer to those people over there with reverence, because you know Annandale is a multiracial village. Indian Guyanese live in the north and African Guyanese in the south, predominantly because people live on both sides. And we usually refer to our sisters and brothers there as the Congo people. You know, they trace their ancestry back to the Congos, and we call them Congo people. They say Congo nation, a high nation, and we come out of Congo pasture. Annandale, good night. Dr. Van West Charles, talk to us about the role of these international organizations and what they do in a time like this, and why the government ought to liaison with these organizations in terms of dealing with this problem.
Well, let me start off with WHO, because that's the prime specialized agency for health within the United Nations. And it brings together a variety of resources and research on a number of entities. And if we recall, when COVID was first announced it was WHO who got involved in terms of showing the leadership and guiding our people with respect to what we should do, etc., and with respect to how we should approach the vaccines. Now, most of the countries of the world are members of WHO. Some countries have a greater capacity than others. The United States is a larger contributor, UK, most of the European countries, Brazil, etc. But they have their own capabilities, but they also depend on global knowledge and knowledge sharing in terms of fine-tuning their strategies. So when you look at a small country like Guyana, who is a member of WHO, it permits Guyana to benefit from the richness of knowledge that is shared within the organization, and also the reporting of events to WHO, which is shared across the globe. It is for this reason that I kept on saying, in relation to the vaccines, that there are established protocols by WHO, and they arrived at them with inputs from the member states.
Mm-hmm.
So when vaccines, you decided on the protocol for approving for emergency use and final use, even though United States has FDA and CDC, etc., they also work with WHO in a very real manner. So you would ask a question in the case of Guyana that doesn't have capabilities, the virological capabilities, and the virologists to go off on its own to purchase a vaccine not approved by WHO. And the other mainstay vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, etc., they had to go through that process in order to be approved. So you worry, and these are issues that the population is getting information on, and these are issues contributing to the distrust and the hesitancy. But WHO is critical, and that's why there's an office in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
How much guidance the office is giving at this time? I mean, when the director of PAHO said that the variants are circulating in Guyana, there was a negative reaction, a negative comment by Dr. Frank Anthony. But they must know, because a lot of the tests are being done, the references and some are being done by CARPHA. And likewise, UNICEF, which are concerned about children. So you don't know how much input the organizations are having now and guidance with respect to the reopening of schools and the strategies for the reopening of schools. Now, I really thought that CARICOM should have shown more leadership in this matter. Generally with COVID, understanding the economic impact and the developmental impact on the Caribbean countries with respect to COVID. But it doesn't seem as if there is a holistic strategy emanating out of CARICOM. And so each country is making its own announcement, right? And therefore, when we had in the 80s, out of CARICOM, the Caribbean Cooperation in Health, the technical people with the politicians came together and looked at the strategies, but it was the technical people that defined the strategies, and which we had agreement on across the Caribbean. And even to learn from the pool procurement of the Eastern Caribbean. We are, and that is why this matter has occurred, because we do a pool procurement with vaccinations, childhood vaccinations. in the Eastern Caribbean, there is a good example of pooled procurement with respect to drugs, pharmaceuticals. But it doesn't seem as if we are all together. And each country seems to be dealing with it on its own. And I think this should call for a pause on the part of CARICOM to look at these issues in terms of how we get back to the point of looking at health collectively. You know, we went through many studies supported by PAHO, supported by other agencies. And the amount of money that at that time, in the 80s, the study showed that the Caribbean is spending for health of people, of the citizens of the Caribbean, going towards North America or going to Europe for treatment. And all the study was directing us to is looking at these different centers within the Caribbean that can serve the population. So I think that I don't perceive an aggressive leadership on this matter by CARICOM. And I would say to you that, and that's why I'm saying in terms of the monitoring of the criteria for the reopening of schools, in order to build trust, involve the multilateral agencies and some of the bilateral agencies so that there is an objective view of the readiness for schools to be reopened. And do not underestimate the issue of water and sanitation in terms of the strategy with this thing. And I want to say, look, in some instances, as I said last night on Ben Shopfield, the buses that you had, all right, you don't like the name David Granger buses. Well, call it One People, One Nation, One Destiny, and put more buses in to move our children in a safe manner to school. And they're not caught up in these minibuses and the transmission is going back and forth.
Yeah.
So let us look at these matters, even how are these children going to be eating in schools? It may be revealing because some of the children from poor environments may not be carrying very nutritious meals.
Yeah.
You know, and those things are important. So I think the role of the multilateral agencies is critical in this matter.
In this kind. And on that note, Richard Van West Charles, Dr. Richard Van West Charles, thank you very much for coming on tonight. I think we've been able to have a very civil discussion, a very informative discussion. And I think there are some things that you've put on the table that are critical: water, sanitation, transportation. That you've put on the table the role of multilateral organizations in terms of helping us with education and helping us to give that stamp of approval, which the government itself is not able to. Inclusion in the task force and these things. Less politics and more technical people. I think those are some of the things. There may be more that I'm missing, but I think you've given us something here tonight for us to consider as we deal with the challenges of COVID-19 in our country, Guyana, but in the rest of the world where our people are.
If I may make this last point,
yeah.
I believe, because I keep saying this is a national security issue, I believe that the politicians, you know, we have the issue of installed and if it wasn't installed. I think we got to move forward now.
Yeah.
We got to deal with this matter. This is a serious matter. Let us get over it and get to the chase and try to ensure that we can demonstrate a degree of maturity on all sides in dealing with these national matters, because it's not only this. There are some other serious national matters with the flooding, and you're going to see the health impacts of those also down the road.
And I endorse that position. I truly endorse that position. You and I and all of us on our side of the aisle, we know what happened at the election. We know what has happened in the wake of the elections, but this is a national security This is a national public health issue. Public health and security are closely linked. Security is not just about military now. We're talking about security in its broadest sense. And for us in Guyana, that's not fighting wars against other countries, or wars are inside health wars,
That's right.
education, and so forth. And so I endorse that. This is a time that we have to reach for a national approach to this problem. Thank you very much, Richard. I'll bring you back from time to time so that we can continue this discussion.
Anytime. Thank you. Good night to your listeners, and stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. Diane, Desiree Chapman from out of London and Europe, a lot in the house tonight. Thank you all for staying up late to be with us. I think tonight's program was quite instructive. I like it. I like all my programs, but I like tonight's program because I think we need this calm. Rhonda, good night. You're with us. We need this kind of measured and calm discussion and intervention, which will give us time to reflect a little bit more on where we are. Good night. Walk good. See you on Thursday. Somebody's said they haven't seen Aubrey Norton in a long time on the program. I think it's Gladys who's calling for Aubrey. Aubrey will be here on Thursday, and Amanza will be here on Thursday. They'll be dealing with that memo that the government sent to the US Congress after Hakeem Jeffries pulled them up in New York. We're going to be talking about their reaction with Aubrey and Amanza, and I'm going to try to get one of the lawyers, at least one of them in the case, but certainly a lawyer, to come on and spend some time talking with us about the legal implications and the case that they've just filed. Again, good night, and walk good. Stay good.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.